Hello, my friends. Welcome. My name is Joe. This is the Joe Martino Show. And today we're going to talk about book banning. Are books being banned? Are they being challenged? And can we have a better conversation about this issue than one that just puts those we disagree with as the stupid idiots that are our enemies? Let's kick it off. This is the Joe Martino Show.
You're listening to The Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
Hey everybody, let's kick this off. Let's talk about banned books. If you didn't know, Banned Books Week is coming September 22nd to September 28th, and most of the conversations that I have about banned books are the most frustrating conversations I have with anybody about anything, and that includes politics, because banned books is a political issue. We're not going to talk about the politics too much here today, except to talk about how they interact and impact the conversation about banned books. We just have to be honest and realistic about that reality that banned books is a political conversation. And here's why. If you don't know, banned books is the idea that any book that people try to remove from a public library or a public school library, it becomes a banned book. I actually hate the term because a banned book means that you can't get it, right? And I also hate it because if you bring up religious texts, say the Bible, people are like, that's not banned. It's literally the most banned book in the history of the world. Like you can go to other countries, and if you have a Bible, you'll get in trouble. And for people to deny that, it's silly. You can't have any religious book. So I'm okay if we talk about any religious text as a banned book because they've all been banned. Now, there has been a movement to change the conversation from banned books to challenge books. And I love that conversation because that's an actual term. Remember, I really think terms matter. And when we start talking about books like, hey, I want this book removed from the public school library because I don't think it's appropriate for kids, I've now challenged the book. Even if I get it removed, I'm not banning it. And I know the argument I typically hear is, well, what about people who don't have resources to go buy the book? To that, I say we have to have a conversation about the distinction between a public school and a public community library. Because at most public schools, we force kids to go to the library every day. And if we're forcing them to go to the library, we've now changed the conversation a bit. We've now changed what freedom is a little bit, right? That the idea behind this is, well, everybody should have the freedom to read everything and we shouldn't ban anything. But here's my frustration. Every September, usually around Labor Day, conversations about banned books kicks off. And somebody will say, hey, what's your favorite banned book? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And as we start to talk about banned books, somebody will say, well, my favorite banned book to read is the Bible. That's not banned, shut up. And they usually throw in a few expletives and call the person's names. And this year's the first time I've really seen it. There is this wonderful movement by my more liberal friends. That's misinformation. No, that's just using the actual definition of banned books. And so I will often say, well, tell me what the definition of banned is. And then we change the definition. That's one of the most frustrating things about this conversation to me. If you're going to have healthy conversations, you have to have conversations that stick with terms that mean what they mean. We can change the terms, but then we have to agree on it. I can't be driving down the road and be like, well, yeah, officer, I wasn't speeding, because even though you read that speed limit is 70 miles an hour, when I see that 70, I think that 70 actually means 90. And people are going to be like, that's stupid. I agree. But so is the idea that we get to pick and choose what book is banned or isn't banned. And so I'll go with the definition I hear the most. Any book that has been removed from the library because of someone complaining about it. Well, I've had kids check at different high schools. Can you get your hands on a Bible in your school library? So far, I'm 5 for 5 of no, I can't. I cannot get a Bible in my school library. By definition, that's a banned book. And if you actually care about freedom of reading, you should care about that. And this matters because in the history of the world, books have literally been banned. People have literally been put in jail, tortured, and yes, even murdered in some cultures for banning books. It's why I'm happy to engage the conversation about book banning. It's why I'm happy to engage the conversation about like, well, what does it mean to remove books from the school library then, or the public library? But when we refuse to say, well, a book that I don't agree with isn't in the library, but that doesn't make it banned, we're hypocrites. Or my favorite is this, and I put a meme up on my Facebook. If you're not following me on Facebook, it's facebook.com/joe.martino.16. All my stuff is public there. You can see it. And the meme essentially says, or doesn't essentially, I'm literally reading it, says, I don't know who needs to hear this, but keeping school libraries age appropriate is not the same as book banning. To which immediately, and I knew someone was going to say this, well, who decides that? Well, how the heck do we decide what is age appropriate for kids in any other aspect of life? We have ratings for what's appropriate on TV, in movies. We even have behavioral routines that we say are age appropriate or not age appropriate. If two 16-year-olds want to have sex, that's age appropriate according to our laws. We figured that out. Well, not everybody agrees with it. I agree. I'm not asking for everybody to agree. I'm asking for us to have a conversation. And invariably, people come for it. One of my friends shared that meme. Somebody said on her post, well, who gets to decide that? The most banned books are blah, blah, blah. And he and I got talking about it. And typically, as I try to do, I just let him talk. And I said, but here's the thing. You're actually agreeing with the point of the post, which is you believe that there are certain books that are age appropriate for certain kids. Like we typically don't have a problem with that. If someone gives a fourth grader porn magazine, we'll arrest that person. If they give them a book that describes the actions in that book, we won't arrest him. We'll call that freedom of reading. That seems really messed up to me. This is why I actually support the idea of book challenge or challenged books. I think that's a great term because, yeah, there are going to be people that challenge books, and there's going to be people that think the book that I allow my kids to read is not appropriate for their kids to read, and back and forth. And one of the most common answers that I get is, well, that should be between the parent and the student, or the parent and the child. And by and large, I agree with that. But I can tell you, I've had conversations with someone, actually two someones, who were defending a teacher sleeping with a student because the parents were okay with it. And the parents in that situation said to me, if it had been my minor child, 14-year-old, as long as she was okay with it, I would be okay with it. We're never going to say that's okay. So we have to figure out those exceptions. And I realize that they're in the minority, but we do have to figure that out as part of this conversation. It's the other reason I hate the term book banning for challenge books is it shuts the conversation down. Nobody's going to have a conversation because I don't want to be a person that bans books. And we can just keep coming back to that. We live in a society where we pick the worst possible word to dismiss the people that we disagree with. We live in a society where if I disagree with you, all I have to do is call you an extremist. I can just put you into the extremist group. You're either a right-wing extremist or a left-wing extremist. And whichever it is. If you want to keep this book in, well, you're clearly a left-wing extremist, a pedophile that wants to bring porn into the schools. If you want to get rid of the book, you're a right-wing extremist who wants to kill democracy. And we're ruining the conversation because they're not banned books. Well, kids won't have access to them if they're not in their school. Maybe, like, at some level, we do have to factor that in. I agree. The school library is a wonderful resource for people that may not have resources to get books at home. They might not have resources to get to their local community library. And I think that has to be a different discussion. The community library versus the school library. Because again, we're not forcing kids to go to the community library. We do force kids to go to the school library. They have to go to the school library. Some schools have a mandatory, you have to check a book out, you have to read it 20 minutes a day type of thing. And we live in a Republican democracy, right, where the majority wins on a lot of things. A democratic republic, not a Republican democracy, but you know what I mean. The majority wins on a lot of things. Doesn't have to be the majority all the time for certain things. So there's going to be controversy here, and we want to avoid words that shut down the conversation. We want to have conversations. Hey, that's a challenged book. And you know what? This happened in my house. My daughter, when she was in 4th grade, I had her read a book that I knew was required reading for seniors in our school district because it dealt with issues that I knew she was going to wrestle with as she grew, as she got older. And so it made more sense to me to have her read it when we could talk about it. I never told my wife. My wife was like, what are you doing? Like when my daughter went and had the conversation with her. And there are people who have told me I wouldn't let my 4th grader read that book. Okay, cool. I get it. And I'm okay if they challenge that book in the school library. But the idea, well, how do we decide what's appropriate? Because I'm afraid that books I don't want challenged are going to be challenged. Okay, like let's just say that, and let's not act like we don't know how to come up with some sort of community standard for people. And we can even accept that community standard is not going to be set in stone. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult. We're going to have controversy around it. And we can be okay with all of that. I told somebody, I said, you know what? I don't care if books that I disagree with are in the library. I don't. I do want to make sure that if I'm forcing my kids are being forced to go to the library, and there are books in our library that I do not think should be there. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time online to watch school board meetings where parents show up with banned books that they want to ban from their elementary school. And school board members won't even let them read it out loud. It's just porn. And those aren't doctored videos. You can watch them. You can watch them on news stations that are not for banned books. And when we start with it's a banned book, we kill that conversation. And why is it okay that my kid has to go to a library and read a book or be exposed to a book that the school board won't let be read in their area? Or not their area, but in their presence. Like you can watch, just go on YouTube. Not exactly a bastion of conservative thought. There's one on MSNBC, not exactly a right-leaning news source. And here's the litmus test. If you're for the Bible being in the school, but you don't want another book but you don't want another book in the school library because you don't agree with its content and it's not of a sexual nature, I think that has to be a separate conversation. Then you don't actually believe in freedom of reading. Conversely, if you want that book about that content that you agree with, but you want the Bible out, you don't believe in freedom of reading. Because I don't care. My kid, read it. Read whatever you want. Let's talk about it. That's freedom of reading. I want to make sure it's age appropriate. I'm not giving my son books. He's 11, soon to be 12, scary as that is. I'm not giving him books that deal with how-tos on sex. And those have been found in some, not all, public school libraries. That has to be part of the conversation. We need to have a conversation about what is appropriate sexual material in schools. Now, one of my friends says that once kids are reading about how animals reproduce, they should be able to read about how humans reproduce. Okay, I think that is a reasonable position. Another one of my friends put up a comment that somehow I missed in all this. I was camping when I put this up, but he said he was at a conference where somebody read a section about a book about a little girl who was confused that her father was choosing to abuse her sister over her. She wondered if she was still his favorite. A very disturbing idea, but all too common in childhood trauma. True statements. He goes on to say that book could be used to help people. And he says this, who gets to make the call as a parent? We should monitor what our kids read, but do I have the right to ban a book that might be helpful to another child because my kid isn't in that situation? Here's my rub with that. And he's a good friend of mine. Actually, at the end, he says, this response isn't for Joe. We're old friends. So JP, if you listen to this isn't necessarily for you, but this part of it is. I agree with, hey, we have to consider who might these books help. But if you're a long-term listener, you know that the other thing we have to ask is, what about the kids it could hurt? Like, how do we measure that out? How do we decide? And when we lead with a word that is at best deceiving and sets ourselves up so that we're the heroes and anybody who disagrees with us is the enemy, such as banned, we're killing that conversation. Because we need to have a conversation about like, okay, wait, potentially this book could help somebody. Okay, I'm happy to have that conversation. And We need to have a conversation about, but wait, this same book could also hurt kids. How do we figure out what we're doing with it? And when we couch this conversation in banned books versus challenged books, we're in trouble. If we say all books that deal with sex need to be taken from the school, we're in trouble. But we do need to have the conversation because, again, what's the cost, right? Price is what you pay. Value is what you get. Cost is total ownership. You buy a house for $100,000. It's worth $200,000. You have $100,000 worth of equity. Yoo-hoo, way to go. But it's not, you don't stop there. You got to go buy furniture. You got to pay taxes. You got to cut the grass or have somebody come cut the grass. If you don't have somebody cut the grass, you got to pay the fines. Whatever it is, there's total cost ownership. What's the total cost ownership of leaving these books in the schools? What do we lose and what do we gain? That's an actual conversation I'd love to have. The who gets to make the call, we do collectively. That is literally what we do in every other thing. I think the way school systems are set up is silly. I've, by and large, bid my time on this because my kids were in the schools. But the idea that we just randomly segregate kids because they're of the same age is silly. Our entire education system built on a Prussian model. You don't believe me? Look it up. But we can't have that conversation because somehow I'm insulting good people who have dedicated their lives to helping raise kids. When I say not everyone that's teaching, that's why they're in teaching. That's crazy to me. We've got to have hard conversations. And the books about the conversation about what books we're going to allow in our schools or in our communities are hard conversations. And the minute we're like, no, that book can't be there because I disagree with it, we have a challenged book and we need to have better conversations about it. We need to have better conversations about what is age-appropriate book reading for the public setting. Now look, if my school says that my daughter can't read a book because she's in 4th grade and it's not appropriate for her, that's not stopping me from getting it. That's not stopping me from going to the local library. Well, not everybody has access to a local library. True, and we could talk about that because, a lot of our big government friends are upset, and rightfully so, when I don't know about your town, but my town has the little library. They're not actually part of the library, but they're little houses that people built and they put up on 4x4s, and you can drop off a book and take a book. Like, there's access, people. Again, we have to decide, how do we figure out, okay, what's the acceptable number? There has to be an acceptable number for both sides of this. I'm willing to expose X amount of kids percentage-wise to these books because it could help X amount of kids percentage-wise to these books. But we don't teach kids sex ed in 1st grade. I know there are people that want to, but by and large, as a community, we agree that's not age appropriate. Now, there might be a 1st grader being abused who could be helped by that, but we have decided collectively that the majority of kids would not be benefited and would probably be put at risk if we had that conversation in 1st grade. But suddenly when we start talking about books, oh my gosh, wring our hands. We don't know how to decide what's age appropriate and what isn't. What do you mean? How do we not understand or know what is age appropriate and what isn't? How come we can't make a distinction between banning and challenging a book? Is it because we just don't want to do hard things? And I'm talking more about us. Forget the people in charge. I'm talking more about us as parents. More about us as a community. Why don't we engage in hard conversations? Well, but I feel, okay, great. And you're entitled to that feeling. But how do we make that part of the community collective? Because we live in a community, and if you follow me at all, life's just complicated. Suddenly when we're talking about books, we're like, oh man, I don't know. So here's how I think we fix it. A, we have to take away the word banned. We're not actually banning books, we're challenging them. B, we need to have better conversations that start with looking at, let's talk about 3 things. Is there a difference between community schools and public schools? Community libraries and public libraries? I would say yes. Is there a difference between material I disagree with and sexually explicit material, which I can still disagree with. I would say yes. And we need to have those conversations in those silos. We do get to have the conversation, how do we get to decide? But I think we need to be a little bit more intellectually transparent here. We actually have some system in place to decide already. Why aren't we using that? Why aren't we using the same system that we have to figure out everything else? And we need to stop labeling everything we disagree with as misinformation. I know that there are people who don't like Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged. I don't know how you read her stuff and don't think we're living in that time at some level. I disagree with you, so that's misinformation. I disagree with you, so you're an extremist, left or right. Not only is that silly, it's not helpful. We're actually hurting ourselves. We're hurting our communities. We're hurting our society. And we can do better. All right, well, there's my rant for the week. Let freedom read. I actually agree with that. And I think we can do that with some boundaries. Thanks so much for listening. Tell me what you think. I'd love to know. Some of you I know are going to disagree with me. Some of you are going to agree with me. I'm sure some of you are going to think I don't go far enough. Some of you think I go too far. Whatever it is, I'd love to hear it. Let me know. Put a comment on my blog. Send me an email. Twitter, whatever. Is it Twitter or X? X, excuse me. All right. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.